It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. Sharing a tip has always been a question for each of my guests on A Quilter's Life podcast. But this is the third year I have put them into an episode sharing just the tips from that year. This year, I'm going to add who gave the tip, so if you want to look them up, you can. We received so many great tips this year. I wanted to have a top 10 list, but I ended up with 12. These first 8 tips are ones that only one person gave. We'll start with Andy Stanfield gave wash batiks before cutting. Those fabrics tend to bleed more because of the process used to create them. Aaron Grogan said, when making covered corners, also known as snowballed corners, instead of following normal directions of sew, trim, press, change the order to sew, press, trim. The bias edge won't stretch as it does when you do it that first way. Jan Lockhart shared, take a picture, which helps, but also go the next step and change the picture to black and white, and it helps with the color placement. I have been so amazed when I've used Jan's tip. Certain blocks show that they're out of place when you use this process. Holly Sprout says make sure you read through the instructions completely before you start the project and measure things thoroughly before you cut them out. We've all been there when we're in a hurry and we're so sure we understand and measured correctly, but taking that extra step to double check is always worth it. Lisa Shepard Stewart shares, try a new fabric that you've never used before in quilting and mix it in with the fabric you have. Repurpose a pillow or something simple where you can experiment. I haven't reached a comfort level to try this, have you? Maybe I just need to take that leap. Then Robin Cap says, don't overthink. Instead, when you think about it, just do it. Don't be afraid. Robin's tip could probably apply to me to try Lisa's tip. I met Mary Shepard at QuiltCon, and she suggested the book Walk by Jackie Gehring because Jackie's explanation of how to get a good sandwich and how to get a good stitch is like nothing else Mary has ever seen. I also met Dora Carey at QuiltCon. She gave me 2 tips. First, slow down. Her second tip is to make a template out of batting. She also has a no-base quilting method where you don't need to pin it because cotton sticks to cotton. Both Robin Capps and Juanita Roby gave the tip about a 1/4 foot. Robin says, make sure you have a good 1/4 foot on your sewing machine. It makes a difference on your pattern and your seams. It's a personal preference if you want to press the seams open or to the side. And Juanita shared, make sure you have your 1/4 inch seams good. Terry Tope and Eva Saunders both had tips for working with thread. Terry's tip is, when you pull your thread off the spool, use the end that you started pulling to go through your needle and not the end that you cut. Because of the way it's wound on the spool, this will help your thread not to knot as much. So many times when I'm pulling that thread off the spool, I just cut it and I don't think which end I'm putting in first. So I found that very interesting. And Eva shared, threads are wound in 2 different ways. Stack wound thread is just wound. It kind of looks like a stack of pancakes. And cross-wound thread will look like shoelaces where you can see an X or a V shape made by the thread. The stack wound goes on a vertical pin, and the cross-wound thread goes on the horizontal pin. If you put it on the wrong pin, the thread will get too twisted and end up breaking. Now Sheila Squires, Megan Fowler, and Lynn Christensen all say starch. Sheila said starch will make you more precise and it makes it easier to cut and sew. Megan added, you should starch and iron your fabric before you cut them. It makes life so much easier. Then big picture, try new things. Lynn Christensen said it simply. She just said, starch your fabrics before you cut them. The following 12 tips all run in the same vein of you know what you're doing, yet they say it with different perspectives. Lacey Messerly says, trust your gut on what you're making. If you want to make it a certain way, make it that way. Ashlyn Down shared, start out with what you love. If it's an advanced pattern, figure out the building blocks instead of feeling like you're drowning in a style. Audra Raznick says, keep learning. Audra tries to incorporate something new in each quilt she makes. Find what works for you. Jen Frost shared, quilt what you love. Seems like the projects that were purchased just because others were doing it were the projects that didn't get finished. Carly Porter says, don't sew when you're hungry. Then she laughed and just said she was being silly. Her tip is, unless you're getting paid for your quilting, don't feel like you have to follow someone's advice. Consider it, but decide for yourself if it's something you want to do. Jackie Perry shared, relax and have fun. Also buy the best fabric, thread, and needles that you can afford. So many times, the sewing machine doesn't work correctly, only to find out we just needed to change the needle. Jody Leonardo says there's no right or wrong. Play outside the box and do what you want with quilting. Then Rochelle Rice shared, you are the only person that has to be satisfied with the work that you're doing on your quilt. It was so much fun visiting with Ellen Happy Phillips at QuiltCon. We went to one of the lectures together, and she shared, when you show your quilt, don't point out the mistakes. There are no mistakes in quilting. Just say thank you and that you're glad you finished your quilt. Patricia Moeller says, break the rules. You'll discover new ways to do things. Emily Dodd, she says, make the quilt you want to make. If you don't like it, you won't finish it. She also shared, if you're sewing curves, the less pins, the better. I did try that tip too, and it did work. Jenny Gaston, the quilter that found me through podcasters that live across our country, and she's practically my neighbor. Jenny says, if you're thinking of giving up on quilting, but you're enjoying at least part of it, keep doing it. Finish that quilt. Each quilt you make will get better. You don't need to keep ripping out to try to make it perfect. Well, I want to thank everyone that was on the podcast this year. I enjoyed each and every one, and I still go back and listen to y'all. I hope you have been enjoying listening to these episodes also. Have a wonderful Christmas holiday, celebrating this week with your friends and family. You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Also, I want to hear about you and your wonderful quilts. Please contact me, Paula Chamberlain, through the website to set up an interview. And as always, thanks for listening.